Orphaned, mange-covered K9 German Shepherd cried for help. What happened next will touch your heart. A scrawny, mange-covered German Shepherd puppy stood trembling in the middle of a rain-soaked alley, his ribs poking through dull fur, his eyes wide with terror. People walked past him. Cars splashed cold puddles inches from his paws. But no one stopped. No one looked twice, until he lifted his head toward the sky and let out a sound that wasn't just a bark. It was a cry for someone, anyone, to see him, to save him. What happened next wasn't just unexpected. It was miraculous, because that desperate cry didn't echo. The rain hadn't stopped for hours. It poured like grief over the cracked streets of downtown Detroit, turning broken pavement into rivers of runoff and mud. The city glowed in cold orange light, flickering through street lamps that buzzed with age. On a forgotten stretch behind an auto repair shop, a mangy German Shepherd puppy stood trembling, bones visible beneath patchy, irritated skin. His fur, what was left of it, was matted in places, torn in others. His tail curled beneath him like a dying leaf clinging to a branch. He had no name, no collar, no home. He was maybe 4 months old, if that. His ears, oversized for his small head, hung low, heavy with infection. But it was his eyes, those wide, amber eyes, that told the story. Eyes that had seen too much for a creature so young. They darted, always scanning, always bracing for the next hit, the next shout, the next door slammed in his face. Most people had ignored him. One woman had screamed when he limped toward her front step. A man had kicked a soda can at him to chase him away from the corner store. Now, soaked to the bone, shivering so hard his legs barely held him upright, the pup stood near a pile of trash bags and did something he hadn't done since his mother vanished. He tilted his head to the sky and howled. Not a bark, not a growl. A high-pitched, raw sound that cracked halfway through. A cry. Somewhere deep in the city, it reached a man who wasn't looking for anything. Eric Dawson sat inside his battered Jeep, parked just outside an old fire station that had long since been converted into a storage facility. His coffee was cold, untouched in the cup holder. A stack of unopened mail sat in the passenger seat, all with the same return address, Veterans Affairs. He wasn't sure what made him pull over that night. Maybe it was the weather. Maybe it was the weight of another sleepless evening. Or maybe it was because he'd driven past this alley before and noticed something different this time. A shape. Small. Shaking. He almost kept going. He hadn't opened his heart to anything in years. Not since he lost Duke. Duke had been his partner. AK-9 unit trained for bomb detection, protection, obedience. The best dog the department had ever seen. And more than that, Duke had been his. Through every deployment, every crisis, every moment Eric couldn't even bring himself to talk about. But when Duke was diagnosed with lymphoma 2 years ago, Eric had made a promise. I'll be with you until the last breath. And he had kept it. Since then, Eric hadn't even considered getting another dog. He told people he was too busy, too tired, too set in his ways. But the truth was simpler than that. He was afraid to love something he could lose. But now, staring at the trembling puppy in the alley, something inside him stirred. He opened the door. The rain hit him immediately, sharp and cold. He stepped closer. The puppy saw him and tried to run, but his back leg collapsed mid-step, sending him crashing into a pile of wet cardboard. He yelped, then crawled backward, tail tucked, eyes locked in panic. "It's okay," Eric said softly. His voice cracked from disuse. He knelt down, palms open. "I'm not going to hurt you." The puppy didn't believe him. Why should he? No one had ever given him a reason to trust. But Eric stayed there in the rain, not moving, letting the seconds stretch. Finally, after what felt like hours, the puppy crept forward, one paw, then another, until his nose touched the tip of Eric's fingers. That was all it took. Eric scooped him up carefully, holding the frail body against his chest. The puppy let out a low whine, more breath than sound. He didn't resist. He was too weak, too broken. But for the first time in his life, he let himself be carried. Eric wrapped the puppy in an old fleece blanket and brought him inside the Jeep. The little dog didn't move much. His breathing was shallow. His ribs stuck out like fence posts. His eyes drooped, though he refused to fully close them, as if terrified of what sleep might bring. "Hang in there, buddy," Eric murmured, already pulling out a lot. "You're not going to die in that alley." He didn't go to the emergency vet. Not yet. He drove home first, a modest one-story brick house just outside the city. The place was quiet, dusty, a home that hadn't heard laughter in years. Eric set the puppy down gently on a towel in the kitchen and filled a small bowl with warm chicken broth. The scent hit the air instantly. The puppy's head lifted, slowly, as if part of him couldn't believe what he was smelling. "Go ahead," Eric said. The pup crawled forward, dragging his back leg. He dipped his tongue into the bowl, once, twice, then suddenly devoured the rest in frantic gulps. Eric stood nearby, a strange tightness in his chest. He remembered that sound, that wild, desperate hunger. He'd seen it in the field, in Duke, in himself. Survival. It wasn't pretty, but it was honest. After the pup finished, he curled into the towel. Eric watched his breathing slow, his tiny body rising and falling like waves trying to find rhythm again. That night, Eric didn't sleep on his bed. He slept on the floor beside a dog he didn't know, but already couldn't walk away from. Eric Dawson stood in the kitchen doorway the next morning, arms folded across his chest, eyes fixed on a ball of fur still curled up in the towel. He hadn't moved him, hadn't tried to touch him again. And yet, the pup was still there, alive, breathing. That was something. He watched the tiny body rise and fall, the way his back leg trembled now and then, and the twitch in his ears at every creak of the house. The little guy hadn't made a sound since last night's desperate cry in the alley, but silence didn't mean peace. Eric knew that too well. After losing Duke, silence had become his closest companion. He spoke only when he had to, worked odd hours to avoid people, and took his meals alone. The only thing he kept in pristine condition was the space in the garage where Duke's old crate, leash, and service vest still hung untouched. Today, though, something had changed. Eric set a bowl of kibble soaked in broth near the towel. The puppy flinched as he approached, but didn't run. "Still don't trust me, huh?" Eric muttered, crouching nearby. The pup slowly opened his eyes, dull gold with tiny flecks of green near the center. He blinked, then fixed his gaze on Eric like he was memorizing his face, one wrinkle, one scar at a time. That look was sharp, too sharp for a street stray. Eric couldn't explain it, but there was intent behind the way the pup watched him. Not fear, not hunger, more like calculation. After a long pause, the puppy dragged himself toward the bowl and ate. Every movement was stiff, but controlled, purposeful. Eric tilted his head. "You're no ordinary mutt, are you?" Later that day, Eric called Dr. Sandler, the local vet he hadn't visited since Duke's last appointment. The receptionist gasped when she recognized his voice. "I thought you moved," she said. "Not yet," Eric replied. "You bringing in a new dog?" Eric hesitated. "I think I am." The pause on the other end was heavy. "We'll get you in this afternoon." When they arrived, Eric carried the pup in a milk crate lined with towels. His body still trembled, but he didn't resist the ride. No barking, no whimpering, just still watchful quiet. Inside the clinic, the familiar smell of antiseptic and pet shampoo hit Eric like a memory bomb. He hadn't walked through these doors in over 2 years, not since Duke's last breath. Every part of him wanted to turn around, but he didn't. Dr. Sandler walked in minutes later, her graying hair pulled back, reading glasses perched low. She took one look at the puppy and sighed. "My God, he's been through hell." She knelt beside the crate and slowly extended her hand. The pup didn't cower. He sniffed, then licked her wrist. "Friendly," she noted. "He wasn't yesterday," Eric said. He collapsed in an alley. She began a full-body exam. Fleas, mange, malnutrition, infection in both ears, old scar on his shoulder, probably from a wire or cage. He's lucky to be alive. Eric nodded but said nothing. You planning to keep him? She asked without looking up. Eric hesitated. I don't know. I didn't plan to find him. She turned to him. Sometimes the ones who show up without asking are the ones we need the most. He looked at the puppy again. He was barely skin and bones, but he had fire behind those tired eyes. 2 hours later, back at the house, Eric gave the pup his first warm bath. It wasn't easy. The moment the water touched his back, the puppy panicked, scrambling, claws scraping against a metal tub, sharp yelps echoing off the tile walls. Easy, easy, Eric whispered, holding him steady. But it wasn't just fear. It was something else. The pup's eyes glazed over, like a flashback, like muscle memory reacting to something old and traumatic. Eric recognized it instantly. I've seen this before, he murmured. You've been trained, or caged, or both. When the bath was done, the pup stood shivering but calmer. Eric wrapped him in a towel and looked him in the eyes. You're not just smart, he said. You've been somewhere. He walked the garage, pup in his arms, and opened the old crate. It was still intact, clean, untouched, preserved. He laid the towel and the pup inside. To his shock, the dog didn't resist. He turned twice and sat, not curled, not collapsed. Saturday, like he knew. Eric's heart skipped. He grabbed an old rubber toy from the shelf, a blue dumbbell Duke used to chew. He held it out. The pup stared at it. Then, slowly, he lifted a paw and tapped the toy. Eric felt the air leave his lungs. That wasn't a coincidence. That was a cue. The next morning, Eric searched through old files in his desk drawer, dog training manuals, K9 behavior assessments, field logs. He held a flashlight to the pup's eyes. No signs of trauma there. He clapped near his ear. The ear twitched. Then, quietly, he said the word he hadn't spoken aloud in years. Sit. The puppy blinked, paused, then lowered his haunches. Perfect form. Eric's throat tightened. He whispered another, Stay. The pup froze. 5 seconds. 10. 15. He didn't move. Eric stepped back, hands trembling. You've been trained. He checked the inner thigh, gently pushing the fur aside. There, just barely visible, a faded tattoo. A tiny code, exactly like the ones Duke and the other K9s had at the police facility in Ann Arbor. This pup wasn't just a stray. He was a registered K9 in training, likely abandoned, maybe after an injury, or an illegal sale, or worse, discarded by someone who didn't want to deal with a defective dog. Eric sat on the floor, knees heavy. He looked at the puppy, still watching him with those intense, loyal eyes. You were born for something greater, weren't you? He whispered. The pup tilted his head. Eric reached out and stroked behind his ear for the first time. This time, the dog didn't flinch. He leaned into the touch. Then let's find out what that is together. The rain had finally stopped. It left behind a thin layer of fog that settled between rooftops and telephone wires, casting a dreamlike stillness over Eric's modest neighborhood. The city felt quiet that morning. Not the absence of people kind of quiet, but the holding your breath kind. Inside the garage, the pup lay curled in the crate, tail twitching slightly as he slept. Eric stood near the workbench, staring at a photo of Duke. It was the only picture he'd ever framed. The dog sat in full K9 vest, tongue out, eyes proud. Beside him, Eric, younger, sharper, smiled in uniform. A real smile. He hadn't looked like that in years. But now, something was different. He turned to the pup and crouched near the crate. You need a name. The dog blinked awake and stretched, his joints cracking with stiffness. Eric studied him. The way his ears perked up now, how he sat straighter, even though his body still hadn't fully healed. There was determination in him. Quiet, steady, like the dog had made a decision to survive, and nothing was going to shake it now. How about Max? Eric offered. The pup looked up at the sound. Max, Eric repeated. Yeah, you look like a Max. For the first time, Max's tail moved. Just once. But it was enough. Eric chuckled. Max it is. They began a routine. Each morning, Eric warmed a mix of kibble and bone broth while Max limped behind him, learning to follow with less fear in each step. After breakfast, Eric would spend 10 minutes trying simple commands. Sit. Stay. Down. Max responded with uncanny accuracy. Not perfect, but far beyond what any stray should have known. Eric dug through old training logs, rereading exercises he hadn't touched in years. He ordered Max a new collar and a soft harness, not the tactical kind, not yet, and cleaned up the backyard to give him space to move without risk. But it wasn't just drills. Max began following Eric from room to room, even curling beside his feet when he sat with coffee on the porch. He'd rest his chin on Eric's boot and let out soft huffs of breath, like it was the safest place in the world. And maybe it was. Still, not everyone saw it that way. Eric took Max to the local park 1 week later. He had waited until Max's mange had cleared enough to not frighten anyone, though his fur still looked patchy in spots. Max walked beside him, cautious but proud, tail low, eyes scanning everything, like a true K9 on patrol. Some people smiled. Most didn't. A woman tugged her child closer. That dog looks dangerous, she muttered. An older man glanced at Max's leg brace and scowled. Should put him down. That limp's permanent. Eric felt the heat rise in his chest, but said nothing. Max heard it, though he froze. And for the first time, Eric saw fear in Max's posture again. Not for himself, but for Eric. The dog thought he'd done something wrong. Eric knelt immediately and cupped Max's head. No, Max. You're okay. You didn't do anything. Max blinked, slowly leaning into the contact. But something had changed. The world outside the garage was not as kind. That night, Eric couldn't sleep. He sat on the back porch, cigarette burning down between his fingers, a habit he thought he'd kicked years ago. Max lay beside him, tail curled against his ribs. You deserve better than this, Eric muttered. Max shifted. You were born for duty, loyalty. You were meant to be someone's partner. He took a long breath. I don't know if I'm still that guy. He expected silence. But Max moved closer, gently resting his head on Eric's knee. Eric looked down, tears stinging behind his eyes. All right, he whispered. Then I'll be that guy again. For you. The next morning, Eric loaded Max into the Jeep and drove 30 minutes north, out to the K9 training facility in Ann Arbor. It wasn't official business, just a quiet visit. The gate guard recognized him instantly. Eric Dawson? Haven't seen you in years. Just visiting. That Duke with you? Eric looked away. No, this is Max. The guard looked at the dog. Duke's son? No, but he's something. They let him in. Eric stood behind a chain-link fence as a young handler ran drills with her Belgian Malinois. The dog was precise, fast, flawless. Max watched from beside him, head tilting at each whistle and command. Then he barked. Once. Short. Direct. Eric turned. You recognize this? Max barked again. Without thinking, Eric gave a sharp command. Search. Max took off toward the practice yard, stumbling slightly but correcting fast. He darted left, paused, then lowered his nose to the grass. Within seconds, he found a training bag tucked under a barrel and sat beside it. Eric froze. A handler nearby turned. Whose dog is that? Eric walked over, stunned. He's not in the system, one of the trainers said, scanning for a tag. Because he was dumped, Eric replied. Found him half dead in an alley. Another trainer stepped forward, examining the tattoo under Max's thigh. This code. He was from the canceled K9 batch in Colorado 3 months ago. They euthanized most after budget cuts. Eric's stomach turned. You're telling me he was supposed to be dead? The trainer nodded. And somehow he made it here. Max sat by Eric's leg, still panting from the search. The trainer crossed her arms. He remembers. Most of them shut down after trauma like that. But he remembers. Eric crouched and met Max's gaze. Of course he does. They returned home just before dusk. Eric opened the garage, let Max wander in, and stood there in the half-light. He looked at the old vest, Duke's, still hanging on the wall. He took it down gently. He didn't put on Max. Not yet, but he placed it on the floor in front of him. Max walked over and sniffed it. Then very slowly he lay down beside it. Eric sat down beside him. The silence was sacred. In that moment, man and dog were no longer strangers. They were two survivors. The wind howled outside, like it remembered something terrible. It rattled loose shutters, sent dust flying across the front yard, and moaned to the alleyways behind Eric's house. Rain threatened on the horizon, but for now, the night held its breath. Inside, Eric sat at the kitchen table, flipping through a yellowed file folder. Max's K-9 record, what little he'd pieced together from the visit to the training facility. Batch K-9-47C, he murmured, marked for termination. Too reactive. He frowned. That didn't track. Max had never shown aggression. Fear, yes. Hesitation, absolutely. But aggression? Not once. Eric reached down and ran his fingers over Max's ear, where the fur had begun to grow back in soft, dark tufts. The dog looked up briefly, eyes half-lidded from sleep. You knew more than they thought, Eric whispered. They just didn't give you a chance. Max stretched, exhaling a sigh of contentment. For the first time in weeks, he looked peaceful, safe. That illusion didn't last. It started with a knock. 3 sharp raps at the front door. Not casual, not polite. Eric looked up, frowning. It was 1:07 a.m. Max immediately stood, ears high, shoulders tense. His stance shifted into something different, professional, alert, the way Duke used to move when danger was near. Eric grabbed the flashlight and stepped toward the door. Stay, he ordered. Max didn't move, but he was watching, waiting. Eric opened the door just a crack. A man stood in the shadows, mid-30s, hoodie pulled over his head, hands in his pockets. Something about the way he leaned forward made every instinct in Eric's body bristle. Can I help you? Eric asked sharply. My car broke down, the man said, voice too casual. Need to use a phone. Eric's gut clenched. There's a gas station 2 blocks away. The man smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Suddenly, he pushed forward, slamming the door open with his shoulder. Eric stumbled back, but not before grabbing the flashlight and swinging it hard. The flashlight cracked against the man's jaw, sending him stumbling, but he recovered fast, pulling a knife from inside his jacket. Max barked once, loud, sharp, commanding. The intruder turned. What the? Max lunged, not like a pet defending his owner, like a trained K-9 going to work. He hit the man low, teeth finding the padded sleeve of the jacket, by instinct, by training, by some memory that survived everything he'd endured. The man fell hard, the knife skittering across the floor. Eric kicked it out of reach and grabbed the baseball bat near the doorframe, slamming it down near the man's head. Stay down. Max held fast, teeth gripping, eyes wild but controlled. The man didn't fight back. He didn't dare. Within minutes, the cops arrived. They knew Eric, former unit, respected. One officer knelt beside Max, still panting, chest heaving from the effort. Where'd you get this dog? Eric looked down at Max. I didn't get him, he said. He found me that night, after the reports were written and the man was cuffed and taken away. Eric sat beside Max on the kitchen floor. You saved my life. Max pressed his head against Eric's chest. You're not broken. Eric could feel the dog's breath, fast and warm, his muscles still quivering with adrenaline. You're AK-9. You always were. Max lifted his eyes. There was pride there now, confidence, like the dog finally believed it too. Eric reached into the old box near the fridge. From inside, he pulled out something he hadn't touched in 2 years. Duke's vest. He held it in his hands for a long time, then looked at Max. I think it's time you had your own. The next day, Eric took Max to the K-9 division. Word had already spread about what happened. The sergeant met them at the gates, arms crossed. expression unreadable. "You brought him back to life," the man said. "You should have brought yourself back with him." Eric raised an eyebrow. "Meaning? You were one of the best we had, Dawson. We lost you when Duke died, but maybe we didn't lose you completely." Eric looked down at Max, standing straight beside him. "I wasn't ready to come back," he admitted, "but maybe I am now." The sergeant nodded slowly. "There's a position open. Civilian K-9 training coordinator. It's not the field, but it's the bridge between what you used to do and what you still can." Eric glanced at Max. "You up for one more mission, partner?" Max barked, loud, confident. The answer was yes. 2 weeks later, Max received his official vest. It wasn't tactical black like Duke's. It was navy, trimmed with reflective gray stitching, with one simple patch on the side. In training, handled with honor. The day Eric clipped it on, Max stood still, tail low, posture perfect. He knew. He remembered. The others in the unit watched with a mix of admiration and disbelief. They'd seen dogs rescued before, but never reborn. Back at home, Eric cleaned out the garage completely. He turned it into a mini training zone, cones, scent boxes, agility tunnels. Max took to it like he'd been doing it his whole life, but there was still healing to do. Max flinched at loud metal sounds, avoided mirrors, startled awake during storms. And Eric? He still dreamed of Duke, still woke up sweating from memories that didn't have names. But now there was a rhythm again. Man and dog, both broken once, now restoring each other, piece by piece. The storm came without warning. Heavy winds crashed against the windows of the training center, and thick clouds swallowed the afternoon light. Inside the main hall, Max paced along the mats, his vest strapped firmly across his back, ears twitching with every rumble of thunder. Eric stood nearby, clipboard in hand, observing another handler go through a simple search drill with a new recruit. Max wasn't on duty today. It was supposed to be a light session, routine, until he walked in, a tall man in a gray coat, clipboard under his arm, civilian, well-dressed, hard expression, a visitor from out of state, representing a former private security firm tied to the failed K-9 program in Colorado, the very one Max had escaped from. Eric immediately recognized the patch sewn on the man's bag, Black Echo Tactical. Max did too. His posture changed instantly, tail tucked, ears back. He lowered himself to the ground and let out a low, trembling whimper. Eric rushed to him, kneeling. Hey, you're okay. You're safe." But Max wasn't looking at Eric. He was staring at the man, and the man was staring back. "Is that 47C?" the stranger asked. Eric stood slowly. "His name is Max." The man frowned. That dog was decommissioned. Dangerous. He wasn't supposed to survive. Eric's voice hardened. "He did, and he saved my life." The man smirked. "Survival doesn't make him stable. You're making a mistake." Eric stepped forward. "And people like you made him believe he was nothing." There was silence, thick, crackling with tension. Then the man turned to leave. But Max stayed curled for the rest of the session. Didn't eat that night. Didn't sleep. Just lay under the workbench in Eric's garage, eyes wide, breath shallow, as if his past had crawled to the wall and wrapped around his chest again. Eric sat beside him until sunrise. He didn't speak. He just stayed. Because sometimes the loudest love is the quiet that refuses to leave. The next day, Eric met with the sergeant. He shut down. Eric said, "That man, it triggered something." The sergeant leaned back. He's got history, but he's got heart too. That dog seen more than most recruits. I know. The sergeant slid a folder across the table. Then prove it. Field eval. Tomorrow. Eric froze. Tomorrow? It's real this time. Urban scenario. Controlled environment. Real decoys, real alerts, live police backup. Max will either step up or shut down. Eric looked down at the file, then back at the man. He won't fail. He couldn't. The next day came faster than expected. The staging area was set, an abandoned warehouse repurposed as a K-9 evaluation zone. Officers stood behind tape. Observers took notes. One of the decoys had inside a crate room with the scent target, a stash of hidden contraband. The rest was silence, stress, and waiting. Eric knelt beside Max. The dog's eyes were wide, focused. But behind the focus, Eric saw it, the fear still lingering, that shadow of the past. "You don't owe them anything," Eric whispered. "You don't need to prove you're not broken." Max's ears twitched. "You just need to be you." Eric clipped the lead to Max's vest, gave one deep breath, then said the word, "Search." Max moved, not fast, not perfect, but determined. He entered the warehouse with nose low, paused and analyzed each scent stream. Around the first corner, he hesitated, ears back, tail flicking, then pushed through. Eric followed, holding the line loose, trusting. They cleared room after room. Max slowed at the entrance to the back hallway. Something in the air, fear, memory, trauma, pulled at him. He stopped. Eric knelt behind him. "It's not where you came from that defines you." Max glanced back, just a flicker, then moved forward. He found the crate room, sniffed once, twice, then sat, strong, certain, alert. The entire room, watching through cameras, let out a breath in unison. Max had passed, and in that moment, so had Eric. Back at the center, the sergeant handed Eric a badge. He's cleared. Official status, certified support and demonstration K-9. Could work public events, school visits, even disaster zones. Eric looked down at Max, lying at his feet. He's already working where it matters. A month later, Eric stood in front of a group of kids at a community center. Max wore his Navy vest. His coat had grown in full, shiny and proud. The scars were still there, but they didn't define him anymore. Eric held the microphone loosely, looking out at the wide-eyed faces. "This is Max," he said. "He was found in an alley, sick, scared, and alone. People said he'd never be good for anything." He looked down. Max sat calmly. "But here he is today, a certified K-9, my partner, my friend." He paused. "We all have scars. We all carry weight. But that doesn't mean we're done. Sometimes the most broken ones become the bravest." He patted Max's head. "And sometimes all they need is someone who won't give up on them." That night, back at home, Eric sat on the porch with Max. Stars blinked quietly above. "You know," Eric whispered, "I used to think I'd never feel like this again. Never trust again. Never care this much." Max leaned his head against Eric's knee. "I guess you taught me something." Eric looked at the sky, voice low. "That courage isn't about being fearless. It's about showing up even when you're terrified." He smiled. "And you, Max, you showed up." Max's tail thumped once on the wood. That was enough.